Brittany Shurley, and I am the Instructional Design Manager at Branching Minds. I'm a former educator. I taught 6th grade through 12th grade, and then I became a learning disability specialist. Went from that position in the district office to become a school-based administrator, and then back to the district office as a director of student services. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about data-driven decision-making to iterate and improve your MTSS processes. Just tell me, by show of hands, who are you all? How many of you are teachers in this room? All right, elementary school teachers, keep your hands up. Okay. How many of you are like support roles? So maybe you're not instructional in a classroom, but maybe you're a school counselor, social worker, psychologist, MTSS coordinator, those sort of roles. Okay. Administrators, school-based administrators. All right. District administrators. And then do I have any like regional coordinators or anybody from state projects here or anything like that? Anybody that I missed? Did I get all the roles? Okay. Is this microphone working for y'all? Okay. Oh, I have my presentation. Yay. Thank you, gentlemen. All right, so you guys have the Bitly. You guys have access to all the slides today. I know that some people like to touch those things and have them. So you have all of that, but we're going to get started. We're going to talk about a few things. I'm going to talk not super fast, but I talk fast naturally. So try to keep up because after this, I think it's happy hour. So I'm going to make sure you get there on time. All right. We're going to talk about data-based decision-making and what data-based decisions you make every day. You all use data every day, right? And I'm going to ask you a really hard question in a minute. You're all going to have an answer. I'm not going to make you say it out loud, but we'll talk about that. Then we're going to talk about what drives the system. So what makes that something that's able to be replicated in the future? What's going to allow us to have the opportunity to continue this work and drive it forward? And then we're going to talk about what data actually connects to that, okay? So my first data question before I get here, I just need to ask you guys this. And think to yourself in your head, but we're going to talk a little bit about what MTSS is, okay? And so over time, we've gotten to this place of a multi-tiered system of supports. And sometimes I have to say that word the whole way, like I have to say the whole phrase out loud because I have to remind myself that it's a noun, a multi-tiered system of supports. It is not something that we do to kids, right? You're not sitting in the MTSS, right? So I want you to think about your first data point right now. How many students do you serve in your multi-tiered system of supports? What percentage of students on your campus or what percentage of students in your classrooms do you serve in your multi-tiered system of supports? Just think about that number in your head. If you're thinking of a number that's less than 100% of your students, let's talk about that and what MTSS is, right? Our multi-tiered system of supports is what we build for all of our students from the time they enter our doors until the time they exit our doors. And every data point that we collect on the way, we can use as a decision maker, right? But sometimes data is overwhelming. And we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about what overwhelm feels like and how we can't make decisions when we have that much data. So we started with the discrepancy model in 1975. Any special educators in here? Okay, I was a former special educator, love the special education realm. I also feel like that fits underneath the MTSS umbrella, right? Like special education students can be served in any tier at any time. And it doesn't mean that they just get to sit in the not proficient zone all the time, right? Like they get to be on the road with everybody else. So we had this discrepancy model in 1975, and we're doing things based on data, right? Like what's the difference between this learner and this learner? And that's how we're gonna look at how we're finding students eligible for special education programs. Well, then we get smarter, right? As we progress over time, we get smarter and we get better about things. So policy follows with that, and policy asked us to change the data that we look at, and let's talk about response to intervention, right? And that happened around 2001 to 2004. It happened around the same time as No Child Left Behind. All of a sudden, there's going to be measures that are going to say we have to figure out how a student's responding to instruction interventions for us to make decisions about what to do next. And you got to kind of build this portfolio. How many of you built portfolios? Folder, graph the little dots on the paper. Yeah, I did it too. All right. Then around like 2009, there was this transition to this thing called MTSS, right? I remember I was maybe like a second year teacher, and we went to this Holiday Inn and we sat in a conference room and we talked about our multi-tiered system of supports, or MTS squared, Florida called it. That's where I'm from, Florida. So they had this cutesy little name, and all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, it's just the new RTI. But is it? No, it's way different, right? Like, we're talking now about proactive. We've gotten smarter, we've gotten better. We've seen what's made students be successful. We've evaluated different data sources. We've understood that it means more than just instruction and intervention, resource allocation, scheduling, staffing models, everything that you're doing on a campus, right? That's your multi-tiered system of supports. But now we have way more data points. And so everyone went data crazy. All the data policy, you need data for this, and you need data for this, and we're gonna assess at this point. How many of you teachers feel like you're assessing all the time? Do you know what to do with all of that data? We pretend like we do, right? Like, we use words like triangulate and all kinds of other things. And we're just gonna bring that right down to where you can make this something that is accessible for you and something that makes sense so that you can iterate these processes a little bit better, okay? All right. Oh, I didn't even tell you about ESSA. 2015 rolls around, and finally policy follows this learning about MTSS. And now we have indicators that say we need to make sure that you guys are pre-assessing, that you guys are proactively looking at the students that need support, and that you're providing student support at 3-tier levels. And so we started to determine what quality interventions were, what wasn't a quality intervention. And so now we're just catching up, right? And it's hard. It's like, oh, we have all this policy, we have to submit this data. So let's talk about that. Okay. How many of you are like feeling a little new to MTSS? Okay, all right. Buckle up. Okay, so this is one of those things that sometimes people are like, I'm just gonna sit here and wait this one out, right? Like, it's just gonna pass. That curriculum passed, these standards passed. You know, if you sit there long enough, you just don't have to do it, right? This one's not leaving. You can see since 1975, we've just been making this grow more and more robust and more intense for how we provide more individualized, more focused supports for our students, right? And so, a multi-tiered system of supports, and there's various ways to describe this. So some states say that there's 4 components or 6 components, but essentially we all agree that these are the components of an MTSS, that you have a universal screening system, that you provide support plans to students, that you use a multi-level prevention system, right? That tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and we'll talk about that. You use data to make informed decisions, and that it's collaborative. You do this in meeting structures, right? You never do it alone. I remember the days like back in my first couple of classrooms, I was problem solving, and I'm like, oh, you know, the 15% in my classroom. Well, if you're 15% and you're 15% and you're 15%, are we actually hitting the students that have needs? No, that was just an old way of thinking about things, right? So we're going to change the data that we look at. So if someone were to deconstruct a picture of MTSS, this is what we'd say it would look like. It's all of these things in this picture. And it comes together to look like this image that you probably are more familiar with, which is the tiered levels of support. It's rooted in academic, behavioral, and social emotional wellness, the whole child picture, right? And we focus on all of these things through the problem-solving cycle, where we find the root cause of something. We analyze why it's happening, and we make a hypothesis as to if we change, this is what will happen. We implement the plan. This part that's the hardest, right? We think that making the plan is the hardest, but it's actually implementing the plan that's the hardest. And then we evaluate that plan. How is it working, and how are our students growing from it, so that we can make the next decision that we have to make, right? So for those of you that are new, a lot of times people think about MTSS like MTSS problem solving. I'm thinking just about instruction and intervention. That's a great starting point. That's the perfect place to start, right? I'm going to use this data to impact how I'm instructing my students, or the interventions that I'm providing to my students. But we have leaders in the room, instructional coaches in the room, district leaders in the room, right? Are we using those same data drivers, those same data systems to assess our resource allocation, both curricular and material resource allocation and our human resources that we have? Does every school across the district get a behavior specialist, or do just the schools that's data indicates they need that special role? Or just the school that has the parents that call the most? Right? What data are we using to make those decisions? I live in the same world as you guys, right? You know, we face the challenges of community, policy, everything else, right? Everything that presses in on our walls. But when you just fall back on this data, you can make really informed decisions about what you're doing. What are some other things other than what's on this list that you might think is considered in your MTSS that maybe I left off? I have facilities usage up there, communication, intervention resources, implementation fidelity. Anything else? Almost every decision you make. What is it? Funding, good, excellent. Where we spend our money, what we spend it on. Any others? Behavioral supports like PBIS, excellent. Professional learning, everything that you guys get to see in here makes a difference, right? Building competency. Meeting structures, how you organize your data and is it accessible to people? What are your policies and procedures? Special educators in here, do you have special policies and procedures that you have to write for? It's due. She's like, I'm doing it. The bane of my existence, I'm doing it. I remember those days. Your community resources, like outside mental health providers, right? That's a big thing right now. How are we connecting the families with extra services? How do we connect our students with additional services and family involvement? So all of these things, literally everything that happens between the doors from 7 to 3 p.m. all falls under your MTSS. Why do I tell you that? Because it was really hard for me today to think about what data I wanted to talk to you all about. It doesn't matter what the resource is or what you're looking at, everything is rooted in problem solving. So if we want to figure out why something is happening in a classroom or where the support needs to go or how we're going to apply the funding, we look for root cause analysis and we follow that problem solving cycle. This is the circle. I think I saw a couple of you guys take a picture of it. This is just the circle put in a linear fashion because some people like to see it like that a little bit better. All right, so why do we do this? Because we're working on continuous improvement. MTSS isn't something that you're just going to put in place or say, let's do this, or let's try this, or we're gonna buy this intervention program. It's gonna be awesome, it's gonna solve all of our problems. I know you've heard it, right? Did it ever work? No, you have to put a few things together, right? Like, it's a lot. Because our students have a lot of different challenges. There's a lot of different skill deficits. A phonemic awareness challenge is a lot different than a comprehension deficit, right? And how we serve a student that has executive functioning challenges versus a student that may not have those same executive functioning challenges or things happening at home is all different. And so one resource is probably not robust enough to solve all of our problems. And you also have to remember that I told you there's like 5 components within an MTSS, right? So maybe you need a resource for universal screening and a different resource for progress monitoring because those are 2 different things, even though they're assessment. But how do you know you need them? You got to engage in the problem solving cycle and make continuous improvements, right? So teachers, if you just get a universal screening and you don't get the progress monitoring tools, don't beat up your principal. You just got to let them know and you got to collect the data to get to the next spot, right? You have to always just be thinking about continuous improvement. What are we going to do the next time? Now what do we need? Now what do we need? It's an ongoing process that you have to look at to build your MTSS. It doesn't happen in one night, and it doesn't happen with one purchase. Okay, we're gonna talk about what helps us with our MTSS. This is research-based, but I'm also gonna tell you that this is based in my 12 years in the school system and what happened with my transition through an MTSS. And this is a little, I wrote a blog on this and it was really called How I Survived and Thrived My Transition to MTSS, because I remember being a second year teacher and I write about it in this blog and I came home and I looked at my husband and I was like, I'm not going back next year. I'm opening a cupcake business. I do not bake, Not sure why that was my route, but I researched like a food truck. I made some mint chocolate chip cookies one night. I thought I was gonna have diabetes. It was the end of it, right? So I was like, okay, I can't make cupcakes and I really don't know how to do anything else but teach. I have no other skills. Teachers, you have a lot of skills, so don't ever think that about yourself. That's how I felt. And so I was like, I guess I'm going back. Okay, so my first 2 years of teaching, I taught a group of boys in one classroom all day, every subject, emotionally, behaviorally disabled students, all day in my room. 22. I was 22 years old. That's why I wanted the cupcake business, you guys. It was really hard. But I had to figure out how to help them. I had middle school students that didn't know how to read, and I would say that to people, and I didn't even know what that meant. Secondary teachers, who are you in here? Secondary people. They don't know how to read. We say that a lot, right? Do you know all these little things about reading? Like there's phonemic awareness, there's phonics, there's all these components of reading that high school people don't know, just so you elementary people, we don't know that at high school. So there came this time where I was like, I have to figure out how to help these students, and I'm going to do it. And so that's when I went to the Holiday Inn, and it was like MTSS, and I was like, whoop, I'm in, early on boarder, jumping in the ocean, don't care about the sharks, I'm on MTSS train, right? And so from there, I slowly embedded each of these things into my classroom. And then I became a coach, and then a learning disability specialist, special ed teacher. And then I was a leader, and I was like, whoa, as tired as I thought I was when I was a teacher, I'm even more tired now because I have to help every single teacher on my campus know what to do and how to find this data and how to access all of this stuff. So I wrote in this blog, basically a memoir in just 1,500 words of over 12 years. It took me 12 years. In my 12th year at my district as the student services director, we went to having 35 model PBIS schools in our district with a full MTSS support system surrounding our students. Like that was my goal. That was like, okay, I'm out. Like I'm out right now. I'm going to Branching Minds. But it was exhausting, and it took 12 years, and that work still isn't done in that district. So if you're 3 years in and you're like, this isn't working, we don't know what we're doing, you're on the path, right? And MTSS can sometimes feel like, and I say this in the blog, and it may be a little grotesque for some people, but I call it bug juice. That's why the pictures of the butterflies are there. And so I just want to remind you of this. I'm going to talk to you about the stuff that's really challenging today. And the experiences that we have in our classroom are really challenging. And to be an educator right now in this world, in this place that we're in this space, is really challenging, right? There's community challenges, internal challenges. It's been COVID. It's literally been one thing after another, after another, after another. And we have these children that are very needy of all of the support that we can provide, right? And we're experiencing, have you ever heard something called flipped triangles? Where more students than ever need an intense level of tiered support, right? And so this is what I'm going to tell you. Bug juice. When a butterfly, before it becomes a butterfly, when it's a caterpillar, it wraps up into the cocoon. And did you know that when it's inside the cocoon, it literally decomposes into just like bug juice, right? And then out from that bug juice comes the beautiful butterfly, right? So literally when you feel like you're at the end of the rope and you feel like you could die, like you feel like you just can't do it, you want to open a cupcake business, just hold on a little bit longer, because it's like a butterfly at the end. MTSS is going to solve all of those challenges for you. So how did we do that? How did we get to that spot where we felt like we were at the butterfly spot? How did we live through that bug juice? Well, we focused on systems drivers. So the first thing that you need to look at are your implementation drivers. This is the thing I'm going to talk about first, not because it's the most important, but because it is the most connected or the most relatable to you, right? Like instruction and intervention. Those are the data points that we think about when we think about implementation drivers. This is your ability to identify students' level of need. How do you know who's doing okay with just tier 1 support alone? How do you know who needs that extra boost to get to grade level standards? How do you know who needs that super boost to get to grade level standards? How do you know that students are responding to the interventions? Are you tracking it? Are you monitoring it? Are you looking at that rate of improvement of your students? And how do you know that your support is quality with your students? These are things that are going to drive implementation on your campus. So these are the things that you're going to monitor. I'm going to talk to you about the data points that go with this later. I just want you to know that these in the back of your mind are the things that you need to have in place. You need to have implementation drivers in place to get your MTSS to a spot where you can iterate those processes, right? Okay, I did it once, I can do it again, and I'll do it again because I can do it the same way each time. The next one is about all of you guys in here, and these are your competency drivers. This is one that sometimes we forget about, right? We come to training and we learn how to use this program, and we come to training and we learn how to use another program, and we come to training and we learn how to use a different program. Do we ever sit down in strategy-based training? Explicit, instructional, strategy-based training. What's your competency, right? Do you sit in competency training for data? So you're told all the time, use the data. In PLC, make data-driven decisions. Triangulate your data. Do you go to training to learn how to do that? It's like magic, right? I call it auto magic. It just happens. Just magically a teacher and they sprinkle the little, this is how you use data to make decisions, right? No, competency is so important that we're able to make the decisions and have accurate information and use all that information to make those decisions. So are we engaging in high quality professional development? And is it beyond just adoption of the next platform? Is it beyond just adoption of the next thing? And is it strategy based? Is it explicit instructional based? High school people, are you engaging in reading training so that you can learn all those 5 components of reading? Those are the things. Are we using strategic staffing models? So how are you putting teachers in the classrooms? How are you putting aides, paraprofessionals in the classrooms? With what teachers? How are teachers being do you guys have like a co-taught model? Sometimes special ed and gen ed teachers in the same classroom together. How are you using those staffing models and are you applying them in the right spots? Is one grade level on a shortage and another grade level getting more support? And then systems for feedback. Sometimes people put evaluation on this. I take that word off. I know principals evaluate, teachers, you know your principals evaluate, but when you're working on iterating and improving your MTSS, we're also talking about the supports or the multi-tiered supports that we're applying to our teachers or to our staff on our campus or at the district level to our principals. Everyone's at a different place in their learning journey on MTSS. Some people were brave enough to raise their hand when I said, how many of you are kind of new to MTSS? And that's a really brave thing to say, but the reality is we're all at a different learning curve. So why do we ask teachers to do something for children that we don't do for teachers or educators as a whole, right? So if I'm looking at a pattern and I'm noticing that Miss Smith is really struggling with her MTSS, I'm not walking over to her evaluation. I'm trying to figure out what the root cause in Miss Smith's classroom is, and then I'm getting her the tools that's going to make it more successful in that classroom. Because when Miss Smith is successful, the school is successful and the students are successful. Nobody wins if we just mark it on an evaluation sheet, right? We want the students to win. And the next driver that we're going to talk about is leadership driver. This is an article. I beg everyone to read it. It's from the Wallace Foundation. There was an empirical research study that there used to be data that said a teacher has the most impact on student achievement, right? Because they're the closest to the students, a student-teacher impact. This article looks at empirical evidence that says a leader, a building level principal, has equal amount of impact on student learning gains and student achievement as a classroom teacher. Why? Equitable decision making, hiring practices, communication, what's important, what's not important, right? That coaching and feedback rather than the evaluative model. And so this article is a wonderful article if you are a leader in this room or an aspiring leader in this room. It's 144 pages. It was done beautifully by the Wallace Foundation and looks at all the things as leaders that you can do and review to make sure that you're working toward effective improvement of your MTSS. All right, I see lots of people taking pictures of that. It's a good one. It's a good one. You'll also have it. Remember that you have the slide links that you downloaded. Okay, so those are the drivers, right? Implementation drivers, these are the things that are gonna make it stick. If we can implement our MTSS with instruction and intervention, if we have the competency to do the things we're asking ourselves to do, and if our leaders are supporting us in our work, those are the 3 things that are gonna drive your MTSS forward. How do we know those things are happening? Well, we use data, right? Okay, So what data do we use? Okay. We talked about the data earlier, right? What are some data pieces that y'all use? Just call them out. What is it? Dibbles. What else? Fastbridge. Star. Who uses referral data? Attendance data. How many students are in special ed? Disproportionality. What else? Math test scores from last week. Woo! Do you guys have accelerated reader? Yep, we use that. What do we use it for? My son's teacher doesn't know. Do y'all know what you use accelerated reader for? Don't tell her I said that. She's very sweet. She just doesn't know what she uses that for. Okay, a lot of data, right? Where's the teacher? I need a teacher. I need a teacher. Open it up. She said no. She said, oh gosh, no. Why don't you want to open it up? Why is it going to explode? Too much. There's too much pressure, too much. Throwing it all out there at the same time. Can't do that. You got to open it up slowly, very slowly. Until it, I'm gonna have to change my shirt. You gotta open it up slowly. Let it bubble up to the top, right? Like, let's look at our NWEA map data for a minute and let's let that settle, right? Because that's a lot of data, you guys. It's a normed assessment. Why do you need other assessments if that is the assessment you use, right? It's a normed assessment. It's telling us how our students are going to do, what the projection is. You want a soda? All right, so I really needed to make sure that you guys were aware that that's what it looks like and that's what it feels like. It feels like all that pressure, there's too much data. It's all inside and it bubbles up, and if it all bubbles up at the same time, it's going to explode everywhere and you're not going to be able to drink it, right? You have to use data so that you can drink it. And so let's talk about the data and really break it down. What is it that you need? What's the bottom line to move it forward? Oh, I was gonna have someone check the time for me and I forgot to ask, but you still got me at 10 minutes, right? Oh, I still have 40 minutes. Okay. All right, so first things first, how do we identify students' level of need? The tiers, right? I got a tier 1 student, I got a tier 2 student, I got a tier 3 student. No, they're just students. It's like regular, they're just students, okay? At any given moment, any one of those students can be presenting a challenge at a various level of need. The level of need, we use norm screeners or normed assessments, or maybe you're even making normed benchmarks, right? If you're high school people, maybe you don't have a screener, but you have common assessments that you're using, and maybe you'll norm those against other students. But the reality is we use these cut points to figure out everyone at this point and below, they're on track to be proficient at the end of grade level with whatever it is, a behavioral skill, an academic skill, a wellness skill. And then you pick your other group. These students between this point and this point, well, they need a tier 2 level of support. And these students beyond that need a tier 3 level of support. And so what do you have in place and what data are you reviewing consistently at a regular cadence? Are you using universal screeners 3 times a year? Do you have access to that data? Do you have access to visualize that data across a grade level, across a whole school, right? Because sometimes we see it at the teacher level. And remember, I said that earlier, that's really good, right? But if you just look and you're like kind of skimming off, okay, these students in my classroom need support. Now we're not looking at the whole grade level, right? What is this data gonna tell us? Well, it's gonna help us figure out, okay, instead of you doing this intervention and you doing this intervention and you doing this intervention, guess what? You have 2 kids in your room, 2 kids in your room, 2 kids in your room. I have someone else that's gonna provide this intervention down the hallway. Whoa. Those are the types of data points that we need to look at. Just that screener data alone can tell us in bulk what generally is happening with skills with our students and how we can group them together. You have way too many students to support individually, right? In the current model that we've built. So we have to, one, adjust our model, and two, find another way to help additional students. So this is your first data point that you're looking at. Do y'all have screeners? What are you using for behavioral data? Do you have a social emotional learning screener that you're looking at your students? Are you able to visualize these things so that you can look at patterns and trends and start to look at your resources differently? Remember, I told you about that. Resource allocation, MTSS is everything. Any other data things that you use to identify student need? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so maybe early warning indicators. High school people, are you using, like, if you're truant, or if you're not passing English or math class because you're not going to get that diploma at the end, right? There's other things. So where do you keep that? So I want you to think in your head around screener, around this whole, how do we identify students' needs? How do you do it in implementation? Do your teachers have competency to access this data and this data alone? Do your teachers agree that this data is sufficient in identifying students' needs, right? I work with schools all around the country, and this didn't happen in Nebraska. You guys are good. So I'll tell you the story, right? But it happened somewhere else that they said to me, well, we triangulate our data and not actually every one of those students has a need. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about why they don't have a need. Well, we looked at this assessment and this assessment. Assessments, and this kind of gets really in the weeds, but assessments have sensitivity and specificity to them, right? And NWEA math, they're going to tell you what the percentage score is, like how valid, what's the specificity and the sensitivity of this assessment. And so it's going to capture a certain number of students. And so every time you add a data point to that, you're messing with the sensitivity and the specificity of how they're grouping those kids together. And so now all of a sudden you might move out some students that don't belong in there, but you're going to move out some students that do belong in that needs support category, right? And you might not ever put them back in because you might say, well, we've never thought that student had a problem before, so why would we think they have a problem now? So this is one of those ones that I'm just saying, do you have competency around understanding what this data is and where that comes from? I was telling one of your regional director, right? That at Branching Minds, I get to talk about MTSS and think about MTSS 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And literally everyone at Branching Minds thinks about MTSS 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You guys don't have the luxury of doing that. So I talk about sensitivity and specificity, and I'm like, did I know that when I was a teacher? And the answer is no, I didn't know any of that stuff. And so how do we get the competency out to all of you guys so that you understand that? So then we buy into the fact that, okay, this screener is enough. I don't have to do 6 more assessments. I'm just gonna use this one because 6 more assessments is gonna take me a lot more time. And then you might be like my son's 3rd grade teacher that doesn't even know where that data is going, right? How am I using that data? Or what did I even do this assessment for if I was just gonna use my own in-class assessment for my students? What was the point? Okay. The next part that we're going to look at, this data is uber important. Implementation, competency, and leadership, building the support plans. So once you've identified the need, now you want to know who's getting the support, okay? Number of support plans is important. I can't tell you how many districts call us and they say, we just want to make sure that every student has a need, has a plan in place. Okay. That's a great starting data point. It will not allow you to iterate or improve your practices if that's the only data point that you're capturing, number of support plans that are in place, okay? That's gonna tell you engagement of your staff, like how excited they are to go and make plans for your MTSS, but that's not gonna tell you that the plan is an adequate plan or an appropriate plan. It's not gonna tell you that there's a goal or that they've delivered the plan, right? So we need to move beyond the, well, we have 500 special education students, we have 300 ELL students, we have whatever the case, all of these students, and we have 600 students identified as having tier 3 needs, and 40% of those students have a plan in place. That's what I hear at like board meetings, right? Sounds like really good data, doesn't it? It would trick almost anyone. Sounds like they know what they're talking about. Nope, it's just a lot of numbers. That's really good that there's 300 plans in place. I'd love to see what those plans look like. Do they have a goal, a progress monitoring tool that's a skill-based assessment and not a curriculum-embedded assessment? Do they have an intervention? Is it being implemented with fidelity? How do you know? Where's that data? That's the data that you need to get your hands on, right? And so those are some things that I have up here. How many students need a plan? Really important to know, because we're going to talk about equity in a little bit. But are the goals appropriate, and how are you setting goals? Do your teachers have competency around how they're setting goals? The first time that I saw a norming chart was a year ago. How many of you have never seen a norming chart before? Don't be afraid to say it, because I'm also going to tell you this. I was over PBIS one time, and I was supposed to be an AP at a high school. And someone was like, they talked about this platform that you had to go to get your data all the time. Like, get your data from the PBIS data warehouse. Okay. But I didn't want to tell anyone. I didn't know how to log into it, because I worked in a district where it was like, you can't tell anybody, because then you'll be super embarrassed and you'll never get hired again. And then you'll be on the bad list and no one will ever like you. And so for a year I sat there and I used to go to my behavior specialist. Did you pull the data from the PBIS platform? Just checking. I was on there and I saw but I never looked at it because I didn't know how to log in. So that's another thing that we can talk about, is this idea that don't hide your data. And don't make it scary for people to ask you where you're putting it, because if people can't find it, that's a whole other situation, right? But I don't know where I was going with this, but I think I asked you guys if you've ever seen a norming chart, right? So if you haven't, I beg you, before happy hour, go get your hands on a norming chart so we can talk about what norming charts look like too, because that was life-changing for me. And if I knew all this stuff when I was in my second year of teaching, I probably wouldn't have wanted to go and make a cupcake business. Okay, so why is this so important? Let's pretend this is a support plan. It's supporting 4 students. Whoa, that's good, right? A group of 4, okay. Students will increase reading comprehension. Yeah, they have a goal. Is that a goal? No. No, that's not a goal. It doesn't even have a number on it. All right, what else? What else is wrong with this? Is this a quality plan? Is there anything else wrong? Once a month progress monitoring? What in the world? You need 3 data points to make a slope. It's going to take 3 months to figure out if this plan is working. The kid's going to be sitting there and being like, you wrote a terrible goal. You're also like giving me read naturally, which is a fluency intervention for a comprehension problem. And we're sitting here forever. But listen, the principal's like, we got 4 kids with a plan. That's not enough, right? We have to be able to evaluate these plans and make sure that we're writing quality plans. So do you have the competency and the leadership that's coaching you through how to write this? Do you have someone that's talking to you about this? Oh, it's a norming chart. I get like, this is really important to me because some people don't know about this or they do know about it, but are you setting goals at a point where you're looking at people that everyone gets the highest achieving goal possible, which is proficiency, right? Like if you have a student with a tier 3 need, maybe they need like a very moderate goal. So I'm just gonna move them to the 10th percentile. That's a no-go. Why does someone get like a very moderate goal and someone else is gonna get like a long range goal? Are your teachers setting short-term plans, but with proficiency goals? Right? The new MAP norming schedule says 40% and above is going to give you that proficiency, right? I should have looked if you all did a linking study for anything else, but I think you're at 40%. So what you would do is every teacher's goal, like let's pretend we have this 2nd grade teacher, we want to get to, in the winter, our student to proficiency. So what's our goal that we're going to write here? Well, it's somewhere between 25 and 50, so maybe like 9. Yeah, because we found the percentile and where we want the kiddo to be in 2nd grade numbers and operations. 9. Then you're going to look at rate of improvement because that is the best way, not to see if a kid meets a very moderate goal or super moderate goal or whatever other thing they're teaching you, and I don't know where. But the point is that we're looking at how low, how slow is this student making gains compared to this student? How long is it going to take us to get to proficiency? And that's going to help us understand our cadence and duration of the interventions that we're providing to our students. Now we're using data to make instructional decisions. Now a principal or a district leader can look at the group as a whole and see what the ROI looks like across the district and see how all students are performing according to proficiency. Oh, I told you we were going to get here. Okay, so this is where like numbers of plans sometimes does become important, right? Equity goals. These charts are just showing you how many students are demonstrating a need in these different demographic areas. Do you have access to this data? Can you see it? What do we do about it? Is it important? Are we all really clear as educators what we're supposed to do about equity? It's like a big buzzword, right? Be equitable. How are you going to be more equitable? How do we do that? What's our competency behind that? Principals, district leaders, are you bringing in specialized training for support in this area so that when a teacher sees the different levels of need for different categories, we understand how to make an impact in that area? Likewise, another little secret number that I'm going to tell you about, and this happens a lot, and this is like down in the depths of your data, so you got to really pull it out sometimes. But I want you to look at who needs support versus who gets support. Are we sometimes accidentally grouping students together with an understanding that they don't actually need an intervention? We're just going to do something special or unique for them that might be in tier 1 instruction because they had lack of access before. Something like that, right? It is, I'm not even kidding you, the amount of times that I go into a school or a district and I look at data and I find that I find numbers, these numbers all kind of look bad, but let's look at the Black or African American population. They're demonstrating the most need. I'll find that those students are primarily not given plans. They don't have a quality support plan in place because it's such a large group of students that they're kind of looking at it as it's a student thing and not something that we do as teachers. And I don't know what the confusion is around that or why that happens, but it's a data point that we need to uncover a lot more often. Am I equitably providing support plans, quality support plans to all of my students? This is another equity piece, and I think this one gets left out a lot. District level leaders, or even apply this to like your school grade level, right? You might have a grade level that looks like this, and things are looking pretty good, right? Like the majority of the students are performing. They're going to meet proficiency at the end of the year, and you just have some other students that need supports. And then you're gonna have a grade level or a school that looks like this. Who gets the paraprofessional? Everyone. No, spend our money the right way. Maybe we give these ones 2 paraprofessionals and these ones don't need any right now because that's what the data's showing. But then we don't stick to that model. We get to be a lot more flexible with how we apply our model of support, right? Because in the next screener, that might flip. And then over time, we might see that across the board, each grade level needs a paraprofessional. So that's going to be data that you're going to look for. This is a big one. This chart might look a little bit confusing to you, so let me explain it. Students that are performing below this line right here are not proficient, okay? So anyone on this side of the line is not proficient. Anyone on this side, so like see this crosshair right here? I'm not very good at math. Do you all know which one's the X and the Y axis? Horizontal's X. All right. They said the X-axis. If it's wrong, it was them. This X-axis right here, everything above it means the student is growing, and everything below it means the student is not growing. So if you're in this little area right here, you're proficient, but you didn't make a gain, you didn't grow. If you're in this little area here, you're growing, but you're not proficient yet, okay? Why is this so important? Do y'all have access to this data? You do? Over time? Over long periods of time? In a way that you can manage it and see it? Because this is super important. I spent a lot of time with high schools, and why is this so important? over time, students make little itsy bitsy times where they fall in progress, right? They lose a little bit of a skill or they didn't catch something along the way, but they stay proficient. So the third grade teacher says they don't need intervention. They were proficient on my assessments. They're passing all my tests. They're proficient on the end of the year state assessment. We're good. They go to fourth grade, lose a little bit in fourth grade. Slowly over time, right? Because school's not that many years when you really think about it, right? Really like 10 years we're truly assessing kids. I mean, hopefully we're getting better at early intervention, looking at pre-K assessments and things like that. But really 10 years of looking at this data. Well, all of a sudden the kids used to get to me in ninth grade and someone would call me and be like, we need a program specialist to come in because we think the student has a learning disability. No, just slowly over time, they weren't able to access certain skills and no one saw it until all of a sudden they weren't proficient in ninth grade. And now we have to go back to like third grade skills because that was the skill that was lacking and it was a progression that was needed on the pathway. So when you're not looking at this data, you can't make progress because you're leaving students behind every day that aren't looking like they are being left behind. So you have to have access on what's happening here. And not because we have to apply individual support to those students, but we have to look at our tier 1 instruction. We have to make curriculum adjustments. We have to make behavioral adjustments, or we have to adjust other things on our campuses that's going to impact this data. So not every data point that you get is just a student data point and going to impact one student. Some of that data you have to look at bigger picture. This is going to impact our systems change. And that's how you start to drive your system forward. Why do we want to do that? Because all these babies, these little rocks, are actually humans. Because all we talk about is data, and the numbers and the colors, and you're green and you're red and you're yellow, and I'm applying this support to you. But each of them is an individual student that we want to graduate, right? Like there's an end game in K-12. It's graduation, and we know that kids are more successful when they graduate from high school, right? Those are the statistics. So how do we get there? We look at these data points and we make sure that we're not just thinking about the data points, but that we're thinking about, oh, you know what? I know this work is really hard and I'm really exhausted, and I now have 6 different groups that I got to figure out how to manage during intervention time. Principals, think about what I need blocks. Scheduling, change your system. How are you teaching, right? The old school model that we have in place right now, like this is the schedule, this is how many minutes everyone has to get, this is when we apply this data. Like, I'm going to say something, it might be unpopular, but when I see that upside down triangle in a school and then everyone comes to me and they're like, oh, we have a 90-minute reading block. And I'm like, oh, that's great. Because that probably tells me that you're teaching on grade level for 90 minutes, right? You have to teach core instruction for 90 minutes, right? Well, not one kid in the room is accessing it. So that sounds like a good plan for 90 minutes for 180 days. Can we borrow time for a short period of time to enhance and target instruction to very specific skill areas and still teach our core competencies during our core block time? Because we don't look like those triangles anymore, right? It's been COVID. In Florida, kids are out of school right now because of Ian. Like my son's not in school, he's running around like a maniac. So there's a lot of challenges, right? There's a lot of reasons why the old model isn't working anymore. So what data are you going to use to change your model? Principal, big question about scheduling, right? It just doesn't work the same way anymore. Change the schedule, right? The kids aren't changing. The kids are who they are. They're coming at us every day. 7 a.m., that's what I used to say. They're gonna be here. They're all gonna be here. And they're gonna leave, and then we'll get like a little breather, but you wanna go home to your family. So change the system that you're working in. Make your MTSS not just be about instruction and intervention. Use the data to change your schedule. Change how you're supporting students. Look at your curriculum. Question things. Question all of those things. Bring this whole team that came with you today to the table to make a decision about what's going to be better. I don't just want Miss Smith and Miss Shurley and Miss Schatz to look at their data in their own classrooms. I need you all to come to the table, third grade teachers, and I need us to decide what do we want to do to help these students and to help you. Because in a multi-tiered system of support, I'll be honest with you, after 12 years, I was like skipping like with the kids and things were working really well and teachers were happy and retention was good, right? It's good. It's for real stuff. It actually works. Teacher data matters. How do you measure teacher data? They'll tell you. They'll tell you if they're happy or not, that's for sure. But participation engagement, so how many people are building plans versus not building plans? That is one of those metrics that you're going to use for that. Climate survey data. MTSS and the climate survey are directly connected. So how people feel that you're using resources, how equitable people feel, do they feel heard? Do they feel as though they're being supported in the classroom? Climate surveys. Teachers, if you don't fill them out, please always fill them out. They are important. And leaders are getting more and more training on how important climate surveys are. And then teacher overall impact data. This also might be unpopular. The best indicator of a successful MTSS is not always students' academic proficiency. Sorry, there's not a super strong correlation. It's correlative, but there's a lot of other things that go into a student's learning and a student's ability to take a test and a lot of things that we know in science. So it cannot be the only indicator that your MTSS is successful, right? How your students feel, how your teachers feel, how the students are progressing and performing, and definitely want to work towards proficiency. But if you're sitting there after year one and you're like, yikes, they're still not proficient. Yeah, 12 years and they're still not proficient students in the classroom, but it's about how you're using that data to make sure that you're growing every day. Remember the butterfly? It takes a long time to grow through that. It takes a long time to make sure that you're impacting students. So what are we going to do? This is a little handout. I'm not sure if you guys all got it, but if you signed up through that little thing, we're going to push this out to you guys. So like just a little reminder of, hey, you came and saw Brittany at this NEMTSS summit. This is just a data collection form, but this isn't the data collection form. This is actually what data you're going to collect, who's going to do it, at what cadence, and what are you going to do as a result of it. We have all kinds of decision rules in MTSS around if a student isn't making progress and they haven't met their goal around a certain time, then you're going to do this, right? Everyone loves a good MTSS flowchart. You need a data flowchart. And you need to put people's names on it, and you need to put a cadence at the time that they're going to review it. And then you need to say what you're going to do as a result of viewing this data. Otherwise, where's the pop? You get a whole bunch. Do you guys call it soda or pop? You guys call it pop? I knew it. All right. Otherwise, you get the pop and the pressure and all the data. And at the end of the year, you got to make a fake. Well, we have 600 plans. We use data to make that decision. It's not a decision. It's not really a data point, just a number. So really, you got to look at what you're doing. What's the indicator? Who's going to review it? What's the cadence at what you're going to look at it? And what are the actions that you're going to take as a result? What actions can you take? Linked right back to those drivers, identify the trends and prioritize the needs. Nothing happens on an individual scale within an MTSS. I know we say tier 3 is for individual students, right? Individual problem solving, and that definitely happens. We individually problem solve as a whole team approach for one student, but really when we look at it, there's patterns that exist even through those students that need individual problem solving, right? There's patterns, trends that you can identify, pockets of where those students are coming from, what types of needs they have, what types of supports we provide. So you're looking at trends and you're prioritizing those needs. Providing a system of support to educators. What's your professional development plan look like? What are you asking people to do? And how are you training them on doing it? Teachers. I know time is limited, so you got to give your principals ideas on when you can take that professional development in. Right? It's hard, but would you ever go to a doctor that didn't get their continuing education credits? Nope. Work with your principals, right? Everyone's under the same stress and pressure, so let them know when you want to accept that training. Do you like it during PLC? Could you trade this for that? Like maybe we don't have to show up on the professional day at that last day of school if we do these little things after school all year. Be creative and come up with a solution to get strategies in your hands. They are changing every day. I learn something new every day. I learn something new every day. There's always more to learn about instruction and teaching. And then understand and employ comprehensive assessment protocols. Make sure that you understand the differences between screeners, between progress monitoring tools, curriculum embedded assessments, and that you're using them proactively and effectively and strategically. No more 16 assessments to get to the point where Johnny gets to go to intervention class, right? You have to be flexible about those things. Look at the master schedule. And communicate, communicate, communicate. I can't say this enough. Have a communication cadence for this data. It has to be transparent. If you got to go into your SIS, if you have to go through a report that you had to ask Terry down at the district office in the basement room to get access to it, that's a no. If you're sitting there for a year and you don't have access to something and you're afraid to ask for it, that's a no. If you're the keeper of the data, figure out how to let everyone access it. If you don't have a data system, search for a data system that everyone can access data. I taught social studies. My kids couldn't read. I had no idea if they were getting support in their other classrooms. So I took on that role myself. I still don't know if they got that support in their English language arts class. When I was assistant principal, we had Marjorie Stoneman Douglas when I was an administrator, Parkland. And after Parkland, Florida came down with all kinds of laws about how we had to do threat assessments and behavioral plans and all these special plans, right? Do you know how challenging it is to make sure that every teacher that teaches a high school student, that's like 7 different teachers, potentially paraprofessionals, whoever's on their lunch duty, their school counselor, to make sure that they know all of these individualized plans and what happened with this and what happened with that, and where do we write it, and you can't write that, and you gotta write this, and FERPA this, and HIPAA that. Yikes. If the teacher teaches the child, they gotta have access to what's happening to them, right? And we got to know what to do with that data. So transparency in our data is really important. So communicate, and don't be afraid to communicate. And don't be afraid to say, I'm not sure what we're going to do about that, but we're going to get a team together to make a decision about what's our root cause, and we're going to problem solve with our data. How do you improve and iterate your practices? You create a strong data culture. You understand the data that you're getting. You understand what data you're looking at, and you make sure that your teachers, that your principals, that your district office people also know it. There's nothing worse than someone coming at you and being like, you gotta keep this data, collect this, and then tell us blah, blah, blah. How do you want me to do that? You want me to put it on a Word document for you and send it in? We have to be realistic with what our data expectations are and why we're collecting it and how we're collecting that data. Okay, I did it. I went fast because I knew I like to let you guys all out early. I feel like that's how you get better training satisfaction. Don't tell my boss. No, my coworker's here. She's gonna tell my boss. All right, so today we learned what implementation drivers make a difference when you're implementing your MTSS, and what data you need to look at, and the importance of leadership involvement, right? Leaders, are you convinced that this is like your ship and you're at the helm of it? Because that's the biggest thing. If your teachers don't see you engaging in the work, they don't want to engage in the work either. It's not a priority to them. How to make strategic decisions about what data to review and what data not to review. I don't really care how many plans are made. I'd rather know that they're quality plans. But if you all want to start going and making plans, then I can use those patterns of all the things that are messed up in those plans to teach you, because teacher competency is important, right? And then ensure that that data is monitored, reviewed for trends, prioritized, and acted upon. There's nothing worse than having to turn in data at the end of the year. District, state peeps in here. Why do we turn in data in May and we get it back in August? We had the whole summer to work on something. If you're collecting it, make sure that you're doing something with it. The same thing that we tell teachers about students, right? If you're collecting AR data, make sure that you're using it, or don't collect it at all, right? Okay, do you have any questions for me? I'm gonna skip this slide. I'm still gonna let you ask questions, so think about them if they're bubbling up in your head. But I'm just gonna tell you a little bit. We're Branching Minds. We're out there. Melissa is out there. She is the sales director for the region. She knows all the wonderful things, but just wanted to show that. Just want to let you know that we are security, personally identifiable information, all of that. We have 1 million certifications. It's a wonderful place. We love MTSS. We love supporting schools. So here's what I'm going to tell you. I became a lover of Branching Minds way before I knew that I was going to come here, because I just read their blog, followed them on Twitter and all the other stuff, because there's so many just tips and tricks and stuff on the website. So branchingminds.com, read the blogs. We write them. We're educators. We talk to educators. You can read the butterfly story. They didn't let me write that I was going to die. They told me it was grotesque. You guys didn't think it was gross, right? Bug juice? I thought it was a beautiful metaphor. All right, you guys write the company and tell them they should have let me say that. And then I definitely need you to let any MTSS summit know how well they did on this summit. It's been an amazing day. I know that you guys have been in a lot of learning today, so you're probably tired, and I got you at the last session, but I hope it wasn't too bad for you. So I'm gonna leave that QR code up there right now so that you guys can do that survey for everyone that put on this lovely day. But why don't you ask me questions if you have any questions? I know they're burning. No questions? Y'all, don't make me do a whip around this room and everyone has to ask a question. You know that's what you did with your students, right? You stood at the door and you were like, then fine. If not one of you has a question, all of you have to have a question. She has a question, she's gonna save you all.
It's more, it's a big question maybe for the people in the room. Okay, so you talked about a modified schedule at the high school level. One of the limitations that we have in rural Nebraska is people resources. So at the high school level, we have one science teacher, one math teacher, one ELA teacher, like blah, 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 blah. Are there any districts represented in here that have a modified schedule where they have like a 45-minute period and then another period is longer? What does that look like?
Does her biggest, I think your biggest question was, is any high school using any type of modified schedule that has limited staffing? So you only have one teacher per curriculum area. So you can't make like a, oh, I'm like, what are those people called that like come around the room and hand you? It's like Mari.
So they just built it around 7. They built it, I want to say it's 9. That's the time they're using something. So if you think of like a bill, almost like that is a shovel.
All right, so our online people, an ADP, what does ADP stand for? AE? Oh, academic enrichment period. That sounds nice, right? That's like a win block, right? So you've shuffled schedule enough to free up 30 minutes, which exist in the day somewhere.
So like every teacher has set kids and rotate.
And this is where building up teacher competency comes in handy, because teachers are still teachers, right? So I wasn't really a math teacher, but I could probably pretend enough that I could help a math student if I had this competency to work with a particular program or on a particular strategy, right? I don't got to know how to get to the answer. The student has to know how to get to the answer. Yeah, I have, my husband's a high school principal. And so the first thing that we did with his school, which is now like they have 0 turnover on their campus. They're a completely restorative campus. Kids don't leave school and they're at 98% graduation rate. 2,600 students. They begged, borrowed, and stole time from passing period. You have about good 45 minutes of your day is spent passing period. So the first thing that they attacked was behavioral interventions, right? We talk a lot about academic interventions, but don't forget that you still have a behavioral component where you can tap into and still reach students academically, right? Like even just that relationship at school might change how they're interacting during their regular class. So really look at those things. So they started strategically placing students with teacher mentors in the areas. So through passing, they could meet and do a modified check-in, check-out. So that was the first place they started. And then the second place they started was on that beg and borrowing from core instruction time. So what they did was a little math problem and determined that between behavior and everything else that happens in a high school classroom, because it's this is high school specific, so you'd have to modify or think about this differently. But between leaving for the bathroom breaks and whatever the case may be, kids were losing about 20 minutes of instruction anyway during the classes. So they worked for rotational 3-week periods where they stole time. So maybe like Tuesday, Thursday, they stole 15 minutes. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they stole 15 minutes. And 2 different groups of students were able to rotate through intervention groups for a 3-week period until they could pull back on those. So those students didn't need that support anymore. So that's where they looked at just providing time within core instruction to get to the point where students can access the core without needing additional supports. All right, there's 2 minutes. I'm happy to let you all go. If you want to walk out, I'm happy to stay here for questions, but I love meeting you all and having you in here today. And come see us out there if you want to talk more. We'll be around.